Hello, my name is Shikabane, a card designer for the Arakai trading card game. If you're watching this and you likely have an interest in learning the game yourself or are vaguely interested in its mechanics and cards, worry not. This video and the subsequent 2 videos in this guide will give you everything you need to be well on your way to knowing how to read Arakai cards. How to play your first duel, how to build your first deck. If you're interested in Arakai, I encourage you to join our Discord server, which will be linked down below in the description. We'd be more than happy to have you join us in the monthly leads or just hang out. We're a very chill community. But on today's topic, in this video we're going to be examining every type of card to exist in Arakai in Set 1 format, also known as Standard format. At the time of recording this video, there's only Set 1 legal in the Standard pool, but the principles will still apply even if you're watching this at a later date. Without further ado, let's jump into this with our very first set of cards. First and foremost in Arakai, there are 2 types of cards. Allies on the left here, and spells on the right. It's important to note that both allies and spells require their nation in your spirit in order to play them. So a Blaze ally, like Nexus here, will require at least 1 Blaze card in your spirit in order for him to be invoked. Same goes for casting spells. You need a Blaze spell and you need a Blaze card in your spirit to cast a Blaze spell. There are a few fundamental differences to identify the changes between allies and spells. First, on the middle, it just tells you. Middle on the left here just tells you whether it's an ally or a spell you're dealing with. But there are other important differences as well. Allies have a level, aka the amount of spirit you need to restrain in order to play it. That's basically tapping in Magic terms. As well as the level also represents the amount of damage you're going to deal when you attack your opponent's life points directly. It also has drawback. Allies have drawback. Drawback is the amount of damage that you take when your ally is destroyed in combat. And of course, you have power at the very bottom, indicating your monster's raw attack strength should it fight other allies. So to repeat, level is how much you deal when you attack directly. Drawback is how much you take if your monster is destroyed in battle. And power is the amount of attack strength your ally has when it's fighting other allies. Spells have none of those things. Their only sharing characteristic between spells and allies is that they have a text box explaining their effects. And they have a name, and they have a class. This one doesn't have a class, but if it had a class, it would be right here. Spells, unlike allies, you cast. You don't invoke spells. So as long as you have the right nation in your spirit, you just cast them. In this example, I'm using a neutral spell, so you don't need any specific spirit to cast it. It can just be used at any time during your main phase. Allies, like I said, you have to restrain spirit to play, and spells you do not. And they restrain themselves to battle during your attack phase. This concludes our brief overview of allies and spells. Now, we're going to dive a little deeper into allies and go over their various types, stats, and effects that you can run into when reading Arakai cards. Starting off, we have allies with no abilities at all. These are vanilla monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh terms. They have no abilities at all, and to compensate, they have larger than average, although uniform stats. All vanillas across the 6 nations, Primal, Haven, Blaze, Astral, Abyss, and Tidal, all have the same stat line equal to their level. Level 5s have 30,000 power and 2 drawback. Level 4s have 2 drawback and 25,000 power. 3s have 1 drawback and 20,000 power. 2s have 1 drawback and 15,000 power. 1s have 0 drawback and 10,000 power. And level 0s have 0 drawback and 5,000 power. Like effect allies, you have to restrain spirit equal to their level in order to invoke them. What is spirit, you might be asking? I've talked about this spirit a lot. Well, in Arakai, at the start of the duel, after you draw your 6 for your starting hand, you place the top 2 cards of your deck into your spirit. And then every turn, you conduct your spirit phase in addition to your draw phase, where you draw a card and then place any card you want from your hand into your spirit, turning it into a part of your resource. Each spirit can be restrained for 1 level's worth of ally. i.e., you need to restrain 5 spirit to play Walking Mountain here. Restrain basically means tapped in Magic terminology, and due to the way the game is designed, you will always start turn 1 with 3 spirit. Turn 2, you get an additional spirit to give you 4. Turn 5, you have 3. Turn 3, you have 5, etc., etc. Meaning, as the game goes on, you can not only just play bigger allies, but more allies. Keep this in mind when considering the importance of the level of an ally you're reading. Note that level 0 allies, like Static Eel here, have a level of 0, meaning you don't have to restrain a single spirit to play them, and they can always be invoked so long as you have the room. Note that in Arakai you can only control 3 allies at a given time. Now that we've seen the strengths of the uniform vanillas, it's time to talk about the average stat lines of allies who actually have effects. Here we have 6 allies, one from each nation again: Primal, Haven, Blaze, Astral, Abyss, and Title. You can tell which nation a card is based on the color of the card. Primal is green, Haven is yellow, Blaze is red, Astral is white, with pink highlights. Abyss is purple, Title is blue. You can also tell from the little symbols they have in the corners in case you're colorblind. Here we have 2 level 1s, 2 level 2s, and 2 level 3s. These allies were chosen specifically because of their stats. Ignore their text boxes for now. Your average level 1 ally will have between 8,000 and 9,000 power, with 1 to no drawback at all. This is often balanced around how good the effect is of the ally, so if an ally has better stats, it might not have as powerful of an effect, so keep that in mind. Especially in Arakai, since between 2 battling allies, the one with bigger power wins. So in this case, the Meditating Trainee would mop the floor with Weekon down there. In addition, that one drawback that Weekon has means the player using Weekon would take a damage when it's destroyed in that encounter. Whereas the Meditating Trainee would take no damage when you destroy it because it has no drawback. Note, this does not include being destroyed by card effects. No drawback is calculated with that. Drawback is only utilized when the ally is destroyed in battle. As for level 2s, they almost always have one drawback. You'll find this is pretty uniform. And a power range of 13,000 to 14,000 power. Level 3s have 1 to 2 drawback respectively on average, and the average power level is 17k to 18k. There are exceptions to this rule, but on average, these are the common stat lines that you'll see on almost every card in standard format for levels 1 through 3. Level 0s with effects don't exist in set 1. As such, I don't have any examples, but on average, level 0s never have any drawback and have about 3,000 to 4,000 power later on, so less than the vanilla. Level 4 is a bit more diverse in that its power stat is a bit more varied. All level 4s have 2 to 3 drawback on them on average, and 22,000 up to 24,000 power, so it's a 3k difference instead of the normal 2. Level 5s almost always have 3 drawback, or in some rare cases 4, and they always usually have 26,000 to 27,000 power. Again, there are exceptions and they do exist, but these are the most common stat lines on allies that exist in the standard format. Next, we're going to be talking about effects. Not specifically the effects on the screen, but the categories of effects. Before you are the 3 most common types of effects in standard. Trigger effects, or trig, are effects that happen when a certain trigger is met. In the case of Dr. Fryan here, his trigger is when he's invoked. So that means when I invoke Dr. Fryan, I can, as a cost, note the parentheses in Arakai, indicate a cost that must be paid, discard 1 card to draw a card. This effect is very simple, but as a recap, the trigger effect is a trigger that occurs at the time listed on the card, when invoked. Next is res effects. Unlike trig effects, res effects can be resolved at any point during your main phase by simply declaring that you're activating the effect. So in this case, at any point during my main phase, I can just say, activate the effect of Super Galaxy Blaster Great Bullet to shuffle 2 of my exiled cards back into my deck to gain 5,000 power until the end of my turn. What is exile? It's like banishing from Yu-Gi-Oh! It's a gimmick of Astro, but not the focus of here. We'll get into that a bit later. Note that this effect is not once per turn at all. There's nothing indicating that, so I could keep activating this res effect as many times as I wanted, so long as I can fulfill its cost of shuffling back 2 exiled cards. Finally, we have perma effects. Unlike res or trig effects, these effects just don't activate, and simply are continuously applied as long as your effect is not nullified or lost. Or negated in terms of Yu-Gi-Oh! In the case of Giant Shock Trooper, his effect is just that, as a perma, he gains 5,000 power during your attack phase only. No declaring the effect required, it just simply works. This has been a brief overview of the most common types of effects in Arakai, but this is not all of them. I've saved the last two for spells section, as most part they're just only listed on spells. So a brief overview: trigger when they meet a condition, res effects you can activate any point during your main phase, and perma effects either apply at a certain point by themselves or just don't activate at all. Next, I feel it's important to cover once per turn effects in Arakai: soft once per turn and hard once per turn. Any card with a soft once per turn effect in Arakai will have this pink once per turn symbol by it. So in the case of Sanctuary Light Ulthors, it has a trig effect. Remember, that means it triggers. In this case, when your opponent declares an attack, gain 1 life. Since this is a soft once per turn, if I controlled 2 Ulthors, they would both trigger, and I would gain 1 life per copy, since each effect can resolve once per turn. However, on the right we have Chrono Extractor, another trig effect that when invoked, you expend 1 spirit as cost, exile the top 2 cards of your deck, then add an astral card from among those cards to your hand. You can only use this effect once per turn. This is a hard once per turn. This is a part of the effect. You can only use that effect once per turn as part of the effect. I'm going to reiterate that. Meaning that if I invoked a second copy of Chrono Extractor, I could not use its effect again, as the game state has already recognized I've resolved this effect this turn. Keep this in mind when reading card effects going forward. I think before we go to spells, we first need to cover the concept of costs in Arakai a bit further than we have. These are a few common costs you'll see in Arakai: targeting, expending, discarding, exiling, and sacrificing. Starting with Cursed Goliath here, so we can see it has an invoke cost of expending 1 spirit. This means I have to expend 1 or turn upside down a spirit. While there are ways of unexpending in Arakai via card effects, there are no inbuilt mechanics to unexpend your spirit. Keep this in mind, because unless you have a way to unexpend with a card effect, your expended spirit are basically expended forever. In addition, his effect targets an ally as cost. This then applies its effect of discarding 2 cards from the top of your own deck, then making the target lose 1,000 power for every ally in your lost area until the end of the turn. So to recap, you have to expend 1 spirit to summon the Goliath. Then, on attack, use your trig effect to target as cost an ally your opponent controls, resolve your effect. Discard 2 cards from the top of your deck, lowering that target's power by 1,000 for every ally in your lost area, which is this game's version of a graveyard or a discard pile. Next we have Anahita here, who has no effects that have cost, but instead is just a more expensive card, with an invoke cost of expending 2 whole spirit. Keep this in mind that the more expensive a card is to invoke, or in a spell's case cast, might be indicative of how powerful an effect it is. In Anahita's case, it has a perma effect, making it so allies cannot activate any effects during the turn they are invoked. This is a powerful floodgate style effect, and as such is balanced by having to expend 2 spirit to play this ally. Next we have a little angel named Raranel, and her effect is a res once per turn, so a soft once per turn. Remember the little once per turn symbol we talked about earlier? Allowing you to add a cost, discard a spell from your hand. Remember, it's in parentheses as a cost, draw a card, gain 1 life. As a reminder from our earlier lesson, this means you can use her res effect anytime during your main phase, once per turn, per copy. It is a soft once per turn, meaning if you have a second Raranel, you can discard a spell as cost again, draw a card, gain 1 life, and use that with 2 or even 3 Raranels if you have them. Black Hole Smith is a star ally from the Astro Nation. Their color is a unique cost amongst its cards called Exile, which, as a reminder, is basically equivalent to banishing from Yu-Gi-Oh! So Black Hole Smith has a trig effect, so he triggers when he's invoked: exile a star from your lost area to draw a card. Or in layman's terms, banish a star card from your discard to draw a card. What is a star card? Well, all allies and most spells have a class, which is displayed right beneath the card's name up here. A star card is any card with star as its class. So in the case of Black Hole Smith, he could exile another copy of himself from the lost area to resolve his effect. Finally, we have Dragon Hatchling, who has another trig effect that when you cast a blaze spell to sacrifice his cost, draw a card and gain 1 life. Note that sacrificing and destroying are 2 different things and are not synonymous with one another. meaning that an ally who is sacrificed is not treated as being destroyed. This might matter for some card effects you might have who trigger when things are destroyed. A sacrificed ally still goes to the lost area, but like I said, it's not treated as though it's destroyed. Well, what's a blaze spell? Well, remember what we talked about earlier on, the little insignia in the bottom. A red spell or a card that has this blaze insignia on it. That about does it for the most common cost you'll see on cards. Just remember that if it's an invoke cost or cast cost, it will always be at the top of the card, and an effect that has a cost will have it in parentheses right there for you to read. Finally, it's time to talk about spells. There are two primary kinds of spells. Those being your typical spell that you just cast and then they go away. They go to the lost area once it resolves. And auras, a spell that once cast remains on the field until destroyed. On the top we have 3 spells, each with their own effects. Purity Elixir is a once per turn gain 3 life spell. Note, once per turn on spells means you can only cast 1 copy of that spell per turn. Unlike with allies, where once per turn on an effect indicated you could use the effect once per copy. So for spells with the once per turn symbol, it means you can cast only 1 of it per turn, only 1 Purity Elixir per turn. Next we have Soul Drain, with a cast cost of sacrificing 2 of your allies to target any ally in play and destroy that target. And finally, we have Valorous Last Stand. It is also a once per turn, so you can only cast 1, and has a cast condition, the first one we've seen here, which simply put is just a condition that must be met to cast the card. In this case, your life has to be 10 or less. You then fulfill your cast cost of discarding your entire hand, then draw 3 cards. Remember, it goes condition, cost, effect in that order. Very important. Then below it, we have 3 auras, which again are spells that simply remain face up on the field. They don't go to the graveyard after they're cast. They stay there until they're destroyed. As you can see, we see the return of Trig, Res, and Perma effects, but I want to draw your attention to the middle card, Yewaf's Journal, which has this familiar once per turn symbol on it. Note, this is not a once per turn to cast the card. This is a once per turn to use the Res effect. This can be a little bit confusing, but in general, if the once per turn is by itself, it's likely a you can only cast 1. If the once per turn is by an effect, like the one it is here, it's likely that you can only use the effect once per turn per copy. And even though this is a soft once per turn, you can only control 1 of this aura. A lot of auras have this perma ability, so unless you could destroy the journal, you're not going to play another one to get the effect again anyway. Hexing Wave also has this perma of you can only control 1, but Starfield of Astrologia does not, meaning you could have up to 3 of this on the field if you wanted to. Getting 3 of it at the start of your turn, exile the top card of your deck. Very important to keep in mind which auras you can only control 1 of and which ones you can't. But people who know Arakai know there's one keyword I haven't touched on yet. It's time to get into it. Swift. Swift is a keyword that basically cheats. It bypasses the rules. What you've known now about effects is that they have to either be a trig effect that happens on a trigger, a perma that's continuously active or resolves by itself, or a res, which only occurs during your main phase. Swift added onto an effect or spell allows it to be cast at instant speed for you Magic players, meaning that they can be cast at any time. They can exist on allies, spells, or even auras. Acid Worm is an ally that allows you to discard it, then target an ally your opponent controls as cost, by the way. Give it minus 2,000 power and minus 1 level until the end of the turn. This being a swift speed means that it works during even your opponent's attack phase. Similarly, Flaming Inheritance is a spell that can be cast at swift speed to once per turn target an ally in play, give it 3,000 power until the end of the turn. And Halo Ascension is a convoluted card, but if you've been paying attention to keywords, you should be able to understand it at this point. Halo Ascension is an aura with a cast cost of expending 1 spirit with a res effect at swift speed, meaning you can use this effect of the card at swift speed anytime you want. 2. Target a level 2 or lower ally you control as cost. Give it minus 1 drawback till the end of the turn, hard once per turn. So even if I had a second Halo Ascension on the field, I could only use the effect once per turn. It also has an optional trigger effect that when it's discarded for the cost or effect of your angel, you can cast it from your lost area, letting you dip back one of your spells that you discarded for one of your earlier costs. This is basically the conclusion of Swift. Basically, all Swift means is that you can cast that thing at any time. You can use the effect anytime, cast the spell anytime, use the effect anytime. But before we go, there is one more effect in Arakai I feel I need to briefly touch on before I end the video. Nullify. What is Nullify? In Arakai, you may occasionally run across effects that cancel your own or stop your attacks. Before you are two ways this can happen. First, Submersive Asphyxiation. It's a spell that at swift speed can, at a cost of its spending 2 spirit and targeting a spell on standby, meaning a spell that's about to resolve, nullify it. This is basically just negate from Yu-Gi-Oh, but it's a different word. Basically, if your opponent uses a spell card, you can chain your Submersive Asphyxiation, targeting it, its spending 2 spirit as cost, it's a swift speed, remember, nullify it. It's basically a counter spell for you Magic players that only works on spells, because unlike with Magic, allies are not treated as spells. At least not in Arakai. But that's not the only nullify. We have Temporal Halt here, which at a swift speed, if you're being attacked directly as its condition, nullify that attack. Then, if you have 10 or more exiled cards, expend 1 spirit, and allies your opponent controls cannot attack directly until the end of the turn entirely. This is a blanket effect. So, you have to note that while this does stop that attack, this will not stop any effects that have a trigger effect when an ally declares an attack. So you have to keep this in mind that maybe you won't stop the effect, but you'll still stop attacks directly at your face. Finally, we have Bond between Beast and Master, which is an aura spell that res soft once per turn. If you control a shaman ally, target a beast you control, it loses its effects until the end of the turn. What does that mean? Well, unlike nullifying an effect, losing your effect basically means that you never had any effects at all. You're basically treated as if those effects never existed on the card. You can't attempt to activate them to be negated. They're just gone entirely. It's as if someone took an eraser and erased them off the card. This has some fundamental differences, but it's a bit more of a higher brain kind of thing, so you don't have to stress yourself out too much about it. The point is, just look at these and remember that nullifying and losing its effects, while they might appear similar at first, have fundamental differences. And that brings us to the end of the video. If you feel like you missed anything, or you just didn't understand that, feel free to rewind it and watch it again. You can watch the specific part that you need. I understand that was a lot of information in like 20 some odd minutes. Before you are 8 cards to be your kind of final exam. If you think that you can read these cards with the knowledge I've given you in this video, then you're probably good to go. These are some of the more convoluted, but they range in difficulty. Some of them have multiple effects, some of them have only one effect, some of them have costs, some of them don't. But here is where I'm going to end today's video. There's going to be 2 more videos in this series. The next one's going to be a duel where I show you how to actually play the game. What good is reading all these cards if you don't know how to play it? And finally, in the final video, I'm going to show you how to build an Arakai deck using the resources present at the Discord. Which, once again, if you'd like to join the Discord, become part of our community, learn the game a bit more properly, we'll be glad to have you. The link's down in the description below. Without any further ado, this has been Shikabane. I'll see you in the next one.